Sands of Time, no damage, no upgrades. This is the third sequence, and this is additionally a segment that I had to re-record. So I mentioned on the previous video that I had to re-record the end of this because I fell. I actually fell in this room. I fell going up against a wall and not jumping, and I fell from about 3 feet, and it took off a nice little chunk of my life, and I didn't notice. So this is all post-game coming back to re-record. Fortunately for me, there's not too much to do here. There's just a couple of wall runs past some blades, a couple of jumps, and then it leads you into a room where you take on a group of the sand creatures, and then you do a block puzzle. But before we do that, we have to do a rather elaborate... it's kind of trading switches with Farah, and it introduces the dynamic between the prince and her character. And if you've never played Prince of Persia before, I recommend that you do, because these videos aren't really going to give you the impression of what happens here, because for story purposes, which we've not been including in the videos, everybody in the kingdom has essentially been turned into these creatures. Everybody is gone. The only people that are left are these two people right now, and they're kind of two sides of a warring nation. So there's a lot of political intrigue in here for these characters not to be best friends with each other, and if you know the start of the game, you know why they aren't. So there's a lot of tension between the prince and her character, and because they're the only people that can do anything right now to help this, except for the vizier, of course, they are bound to each other. And gradually over the game, you see those feelings start to change and those sentiments start to adjust. Because when you were in a life and death situation, of course, everything changes. And they go from being almost petty and aggro to each other into building a much deeper relationship. And considering this is PS2 and it's not the most convoluted story, I think they do a really good job of achieving that character and that tonal shift between the two. And it can be a little bit heavy-handed at times, you know, to get across to the audience, your dog, they're changing their minds about each other. You know, there might be a love story in here somewhere. But it's done enough, I think, that it really does get across what you need to know. And I really appreciated it at the time. And I still think, compared to a lot of the stories we get in games now, this might be one of my favourite examples of a rather simple and linear character development that everybody can understand and resonate with. And then it's funny because the sequel, if you've played it, which I hope you have, it kind of went a different way. And a lot of people miss the prince from this game. They missed his happy-go-lucky kind of attitude. You know, he was very boyish and charming, and then in the second game he was kind of tortured, and it was a much different tone, which is terrible English again. It was a far different tone, should I say, than this one. And then, of course, Farah didn't come back because the prince goes to, I think it's the Island of Time. I don't know the names, guys. It's been a very long time, but you know what I mean. He goes to the island. And she's not in the game, and it's kind of like the Predator to Predator 2 sequel problem, isn't it, where you watch the first Predator and you really enjoy the movie and you really enjoy Dutch's character because it's Arnie and everybody likes Arnie, and then the second movie, you spend the whole movie wanting him to come back and he never does. And unless you know before you go in, it can be a little bit frustrating that you don't get any kind of conclusion or any kind of update on what's happening to Dutch, even though they do give you a little bit of an Easter egg in there. And it's kind of the same thing that they did with the series. The prince never seemed to truly return between installments. He was constantly shifting, constantly adjusting and changing. And down here, I think there's a new enemy, technically. This creature that has the hammer. So the standard brown grunts with the spear, these guys are going to be jump over square triangle to get the execution. And then this guy here, I'm going to use the bankable white around my hourglasses to hit him. And that's all the fight's going to be, guys. I'm going to be fighting the camera more than I'm fighting the opponents, and I'm going to be trying my best not to get caught out, because it's very easy in this game to take a hit. But let's talk about the no upgrades. So, I put the no upgrade stipulation on this run purely based on the fact I didn't really remember what you could upgrade. To my knowledge, there was only really the HP upgrades that you get, because the HP upgrades are quite important to this series. So when I say no upgrades, I mean that, but if there's anything else that you can use, I am going to try not to do so as I get cooked by collision there against the wall. Again, guys, this is a pretty long fight. There's a really strange kind of double standard in Sands of Time where you can kill enemies really quickly, but it feels like the fight's take an eternity even though you are so capable. It's a very odd like psychology when you're playing it, and I don't really know where it comes from. I think it's because you tend to do the very same things a lot, and it just adds this exhausting nature to it as I try to do some fancy stuff with this guy and it just wasn't working. But we take him out, we sheath the blades, we continue on to do the puzzle. And now this is back on the original run, this guys. That's the end of the re-recording. But upgrade-wise, HP upgrades are quite huge later on in the sequels, because they even unlock, I think, the secret ending with the Dahaka, which is kind of cool. Which is going to be frustrating as well, because if I cover that game and I do no upgrades, I'm not going to be able to show you that fight. And I could play through the game twice, one with the HP upgrades and one without them, and then get that. That could be an option. Or I could maybe look online for a save where someone has that, and then just take on the boss. I don't remember that fight being that interesting, but who knows? It's been a long time. Maybe I'll be able to find something interesting about it. Because I've not played the series for quite some time now, and it makes it exciting coming back, because you're coming back with a wealth of knowledge you didn't have at the time. These games are so special to me because I was playing them when they were new, and they were, to me, the peak of the industry. They're about as good as it gets. Really, really exciting. And here's our save point that's going to lead us on to the next sequence. This game is interesting in how it segments its chapters. There are no conventional chapters, there's no conventional mission select, but it tends to do save point to save point to save point like that. And what happens is every so often there are checkpoints that are presented, but it's usually not where you'd like them to be. So whenever you see the game transition to show you any moment where it gives you an idea of where you are, like here right now, this is probably a checkpoint. And then you won't see a checkpoint now until maybe later on when you get into a fight. And it's so easy to do a lot of gameplay in this game and then accidentally like take fall damage or trade with an enemy or jump off an edge like a silly bugger. And then you're all the way back where you started. And it's one of those things where you don't really deal with this problem too much anymore unless you play a game that has a saving option and you don't save. So we're so out of practice when it comes to a game punishing us for what we do. Unless you're a speedrunner. There's a lot of speedrunners now. Those guys, they make a mistake, they start the game from the beginning. That's an unbelievable amount of dedication and conviction towards a game, which I simply do not have. But for, I think, most people, the idea of playing even 5 minutes of gameplay can be a little bit off-putting. And it's this weird kind of entitled sense of instant gratification. And it frustrates me that my brain works that way, because I don't want it to. And I've been trying to trace back where the origins of this kind of lack of patience for this stuff comes from. And I think the best example would probably be something like save states on PC, where you can quick save and quick load. But we have some birds here. I don't know if this is the first time we've fought the birds, but they're kind of interesting because they attack really quickly, and they seem to want to attack you the moment you try to attack them. So the best strategy to take them on seems to be hold block, wait for them to clash with your guard, and then stab them. You can parry them, which is kind of cool. The parry in this game is pretty interesting, but every time I've tried to use it in a moment to make the gameplay cooler, the opponent I've done it on has blocked it. And I'm all for making games difficult, guys. I think it's cool, but blocking a parry, to me, that's a bridge too far. Especially in a game like this where I can literally jump over you and you can't do anything. But, you know, Prince of Persia works in mysterious ways, and I love it in spite of its flaws. I really do. There's a lot of this as well. You move something, and then Farah sees a gap she can go through, and then she goes and she wanders and she do it. She do it. She just do it. That sounds great, doesn't it? And if you're having any problems with the pathing, because I certainly did with the higher frame rates here, all you want to do is restart the checkpoint. Sometimes her AI doesn't work correctly, sometimes you're stood in the way and she can't path directly to what she needs to touch. There's a handful of reasons why she won't do something, but for the most, she works really well. And if you're playing on the PC version, I hope maybe they've cleaned some of that up. I don't actually know much about the version differences as much as I wish I did. But going back to what I was saying, like for instance here, if you fall here, guys, when you're doing this, you go all the way back to before I climbed up the wall to jump onto the first pole in this conservatory. And it's not the worst thing in the world, but when you get to the top of this area, there's a couple of jumps where it's very easy to jump the wrong way. And I fell here a bunch of times. You know, you don't see them in the videos, it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. I fall a lot in this game. And because I'm trying not to use the rewinds to make the video more interesting, there's a lot of times where I could have simply rewound my progress and indeed I didn't do it. But this here's a jump where it's very easy to kind of roll off the edge and do things that's not meant to be done. And there's also a jump coming up where they want you to do a wall run after you push this lever. So you twist this mechanism, And then you go around this other side, and to get down, if you do a wall rump and you jump, you can then slide down the trees. But you can jump from the platform to the tree. It's just incredibly awkward and precise to do. And I was tempted to put the footage in where I did it, but I didn't want to do that because I feel like if anybody watches this and wants to use it as an actual walkthrough, they're going to pull their fucking hair out trying to do it. Because I did it first attempt and was like, dude, that's cool. And then when I hit the checkpoint again because I messed up, I tried to do it and I tried 10 attempts in a row and I couldn't do it because it just kept whiffing. I did the same thing every time as well. You know, it's such a particular jump. So instead, it's better to just do the wall run, I think. But now we get a little bit more dialogue between the two, and we get to take on some of the scarabs. Which the scarab is an interesting enemy, because you can actually knock him on his back, and then you can drain sand from him and replenish your abilities, but I never do that. I always either use the wall attack, or I block them and then go into the full string. By themselves, they're not the most dangerous enemy, but if you're ever going to get hit and have to restart a sequence, it's going to be from an enemy like this, because they have a tendency to look like they're flying or look like they're moving, and then they do a quick headbutt thrust, and it's game over. Unless you hold block the whole time, which I'm avoiding doing, it's very easy to trade with those guys. But I do think it's quick save and quick load that ruined me. And it's funny too, because I came from console. You know, I get into a lot of arguments with people about the differences between console and PC, and you get a lot of people that are very quick to call you PC elitist, when in reality it's just objectively true, and apparently their ego can't take the fact that consoles don't lead the industry as far as technology goes, even though in many ways they lead the industry anyway. And in many, like, tertiary manners, they do lead the industry in technology because everything tends to be designed for them, and that's why they are the priority, because they're the biggest market. But that's a conversation for another time. But people seem to, when I get into these conversations, they think that I'm this dude that started playing games on PC. And it's not true, you know. I started with the Commodore 64, which I suppose you could call a PC, and then we went to the NES and we went to everything after that, and, you know, it was only in 2017 when I decided to start doing more PC things. You know, so I've got many years playing on console and playing on controller and all these things, and when you get into conversations with these people, you find out that these people are like 16. It's like, dude, I've got more time on controller and on console than you have on the earth. Why are we having this conversation? But you get into a lot of arguments, needless arguments. It's the internet, you know how it works. In many ways, I was quite late to PC. But that doesn't mean that I didn't play PC games and I didn't have those experiences, because I was very fortunate that my dad was technologically savvy, and he always tried to make sure that we had that technology in the house so we could learn to type and learn to meet the future head on as it arrived. And I had a lot of friends that had PCs and had gone that direction, so you got exposed to it in different ways. And I went to friends' houses and played things like Soldier of Fortune, you know, went to friends' houses and played Max Payne. If you can think of it, Operation Flashpoint, there were so many games that were played on PC, and all games in those days were this capacity to drop a save wherever you wanted to. And they gave you a lot of power when they did this, because, like, right now in this fight, you could put a save between every one of these birds if you want to, and do it really, really clean. Oh, that was a counter right then. That's the reason why doing the counter sometimes is not the best idea, because sometimes you'll just end up flying off the edge as well, so be very careful with the forward momentum on the counter. But they gave you the opportunity to make your own saves. And I think once you do this, you realise it's the best way it can be done, because then you don't have anybody complaining about the checkpoints. You might have people complaining how you use the checkpoints, but people are always going to have differences and they're always going to clash over it, because that's the way of the world. But I think once you get used to the quick save and the quick load, it changes how you see the flow and the ebb of a level. So when you come back to a checkpoint that's harsh, by the way, this is the tree that you can jump towards. You can land on that tree, and I recommend that you try, because you might do it first attempt as well, and it feels really cool, and then you try and do it again, and it doesn't work so well. But the level design in this game is so stellar that whenever you do a puzzle, you will never have to backtrack usually on the puzzle. There will always be a convenient sequence of steps that you can do to get back to where you started, and it all loops back on itself in like a really nice circle. It's one of the reasons why I think the level design in this game is exceptional, because they were always thinking about getting you from point A to point B, and because traversal and platforming are so important to this franchise, it does it exceptionally well. And this here, I believe, but I'm not certain, somebody might know this more than I do, this to me, these kind of smoky, almost bathhouse-like corridors with a couple enemies, I think this is where the game is loading. I think this is the equivalent to those long corridors in Tony Hawk, you know, Wasteland, where you just ride for ages and there's nothing there. I think it's instancing the rest of the world without giving you a big meaty load. And I like that they add this because it adds a kind of mysticism to the game. It gives you this impression that you're not entirely certain if you are awake or asleep or if you're in some kind of crazy genie's dream. And I think that really helps just the setting and the feeling of how fantastical the events of this game are. But we have another fight here, guys. It is against a new enemy here. It is Viper from Road Rash, if anyone's old enough to get that reference. And I don't really know the name of this creature. It's just a soldier, like a soldier with a chain. From this day forth, we will dub him the Chain Soldier. And much like every other enemy in Sands of Time, you want to see what you can get away with. Can you jump over him? Yes. Can you do the jump over into execution? Potentially. Can you hit him with a wall attack? Potentially. Can you parry him? Potentially. You know, these are the questions you have to ask yourself. Just then was the heavy attack. I don't know if you've seen that before or if you know how that works, because I know I didn't when I was recording it. I saw that on a video after I made this guide, which I should talk about because it might help you when you play to get a bit more diversity out of the combat. So, I don't know if this was in the instruction manual or if this was a tutorial that I didn't do, but if you double tap a direction and press attack, the Prince will do a jumping slash in that direction, and it's the same jumping slash he does at the end of combos, and it's almost always a guaranteed knockdown if it hits. So it can be really, really good to use it in certain circumstances if you know it exists. And it looks okay. They do block it though, that's my one problem with it. I went back through the game a little bit using it to see if I'd missed out on anything interesting. And truth be told, you don't really need it. It's just for diversity's sake and utility if you want to be a much more advanced Prince of Persia fan. But a couple of dancers here with the chain enemy. The dancer is the same as she was before. We're going to knock her down. We're going to execute her with the dagger. And every time you do a retrieval, they call it, every time you do this sacrifice to the gods of sand, this is funny too. Sometimes you can get stuck on those platforms. And additionally, when you climb on some... This is just weird right now. So, you might notice the problem that was happening just then. I got very lucky, by the way. So because I jumped on that wall, and I jumped on that pole, the Prince put his weapon away. So when I was trying to jump over that enemy, I was jumping on the spot like a moron because I didn't have my sword out. And that is a very, very big problem in this game. You will die to things like that. If you see the Prince doing his normal moveset, you need to draw your weapon. Sometimes, in the time it takes you to draw your weapon, you will be attacked. And then things can go really badly. But do not make the mistakes I make. We will definitely be talking a little bit more about the idea of grabbing onto things you don't want to grab onto during combat and some of the advantages of doing that. So thank you for watching, and you take care now.